The AMD 7900 XTX is the hero of today's review. This is the reference version, branded by PowerColor. We'll start with a quick unboxing, then take a look on the specs and build quality of the card. Next, we'll see how it performs, and finally, we'll talk about one of the biggest issues this card might face, the thermals. But first, let's see what's inside of the box. And to be quite honest, there isn't much. All you get is the GPU itself, which even though isn't the longest and thickest of cards, it definitely is on the heavier side of things. The 7900 XTX is 287mm in length, 123 in width and 51mm in height. It's really small, especially when you compare it to the 40 series GPUs from Nvidia and third-party manufacturers. Of course, this is a reference model, and we already know that the 7900 XTX from AIBs will also be quite thick, starting at 3 slots minimum. However, the reference version is quite possibly one of the best choices when it comes to small form factor builds. It should fit into even the most compact cases. In reality, the card is shorter than a 3060 Ti TUF from Asus, but also quite a bit heavier, and I'm surprised that they didn't include any support bracket to keep the card from sagging. I see that the USB-C connector makes a comeback. Pretty nice addition, although I wish there were more ports available, as we get only one HDMI 2.1 and 2 DisplayPort 2.1, while the card can support up to 4 monitors in total. I'm also quite surprised that there's no PCIe port cover to prevent any accidental damage or even port blinds. Hopefully they'll be present in the non-reference cards. When it comes to pure specs, we have 24GB of GDDR6 memory, 384-bit memory bus, the core boosts up to 2.5 GHz, and while gaming it should boost up to 2.3 GHz. It has 6144 compute units, the power draw is rated at 346 watts and the recommended PSU is 800 watts. Now let's move on to benchmarks. First, in Unigine Heaven we get 6846 points in 1080p test, roughly 300 less than the 4080 and around 2300 less than a 4090. At 1440p, the 7900 XTX takes the lead over the 4080 with roughly 200 points more, while 4090 still stays way ahead with around 1300 points lead. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla at 1080p, the 7900 XTX gets 176 FPS on average, falling behind the 4080 and 4090, although by a very small margin, only 8-9 FPS less. It does suffer a bit when it comes to 1% and 0.1% lows. At 1440p, the 7900 XTX averages 144 FPS, 5 less than 4080 and 17 less than a 4090. Pretty good result considering the price difference. Same as before, the card suffers from slightly lower 1% and 0.1% lows. In Dead Red Redemption 2 at 1080p, the 7900 XTX pulls ahead of 4080, averaging 196 FPS, so 30 FPS more, and falls short of the 4090 by just 4 FPS. At 1440p, the 7900 XTX still beats the 4080 by 12 FPS and is 26 FPS behind the 4090. We can also see improvement in lows, both the 1% and 0.1%. In Cyberpunk, on max settings without ray tracing or FSR, the 7900 XTX reaches 175 frames on average on 1080p, beating the 4080 by 5 FPS and falling behind the 4090 by 17 FPS. Things change dramatically, however, when we turn on ray tracing. With ray tracing on at ultra, without any upscaling turned on, the 7900 XTX at 1080p reaches 60 FPS on average, 29 less than the 4080 and 52 less than the 4090. If we turn on FSR, the card still lags behind. The average FPS is at 95, which means it's 26 FPS behind the 4080 and 33 behind the 4090. Bumping the resolution to 1440p, again without any ray tracing or FSR, we get 125 FPS average, 18 more than the 4080 and roughly the same as the 4090. The 1 FPS difference is basically margin error, but it is impressive that the GPU can match the 4090 in raster performance in some cases. However, when we turn on ray tracing without FSR, the performance drops massively. The 7900 XTX is at 39 FPS, which means it's 20 FPS slower than the 4080 and 40 FPS slower than the 3090. Using FSR brings the FPS back to 73, but it's still 35 FPS less than the 4080 and 51 less than the 4090. Moving on to some multiplayer games. In Apex Legends at 1080p, the AMD GPU gets 297 FPS on average, basically capping the game engine, same as the other cards. When we jump to 1440p, we get 292 FPS on average, 17 more than on the 4080 and 5 less than on the 4090. In Modern Warfare 2 benchmark, the 7900 XTX at 1080p gets 264 FPS, beating the 4080 by around 7 FPS, and at 1440p we get 227 FPS for Team Red, so 19 more than on 4080. Before we sum it all up, there's one major thing we need to discuss that hasn't been mentioned yet: the cooling. The card has 3 fans, pretty densely packed radiator fins, so it should deliver great cooling performance, right? Well, here's the problem. On my unit, the junction temperatures reach whopping hot levels of 110 degrees, while the general GPU temp displays only 55-60 degrees. This is a clear issue, either with the cooling design or quality control, and it's hard to tell which without taking the card apart. Either way, after a couple of minutes in game or in benchmark, the card started sounding like a jet taking off. Just take a listen to this. Yes, it's very loud to the point where for me it becomes basically unusable. Of course, that might not be the case for your unit, but the experiences shared by users are divided. Some have this issue, some don't. Hopefully, AIBs have a way to deal with this, and maybe that's why we see their design include a massive heatsink with 3.5 slot thick GPUs. And honestly, if you bought the reference card, please look out for those signs. The junction temps running very hot, as the card will throttle down when it reaches above 110 degrees, which will impact your performance and of course could reduce the longevity of your GPU. I think this is a massive oversight from AMD and something that should be addressed very quickly. And well, at the time of recording this review, AMD first claimed that everything is working as intended, but after some backlash from the community, they asked everyone facing the issue to contact them. Hopefully, this can be sorted out in favor of anyone who has this problem. If you have been affected and have placed an RMA, let us know down in the comments below how it went. Apart from that, I think the GPU is a step in the right direction. This is obviously first time we see a chiplet GPU design, so there are some quirks to be had, and hopefully they will be addressed in the future as AMD builds on their experience. In terms of performance, I was not expecting the 7900 XTX to compete directly with the 4090, but it's nice to see that in some cases, in raster performance, it can get close to it. Same for the 4080, they trade blows depending on the game and scenario. Of course, Nvidia is still king when it comes to DLSS and ray tracing performance, and as I suggested in one of my other videos, AMD is at this moment one generation behind in this field. So if you're looking for a GPU for yourself, there is a simple question you need to answer. Is ray tracing and DLSS or FSR important for you? If yes, then go with Nvidia. If, however, you only care about raster performance in games, then the 7900 XTX is a great alternative that should also save you some cash. And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I'm Laser, and I'll see you soon.